everyone in APAC and our EMEA region. Thank you very much for your time. My name is Tim Ren, and I'll be hosting this event for you today and going through some Firebase solutions and also how to use Firebase with AdMob for better monetization optimization. So again, really appreciate everyone in APAC to stay late and everybody from the Europe region to come up early. We're just gonna give another 30 seconds for everyone to come in and we'll go ahead with the rest of the presentation. Okay, so I think this is about a good time. So again, really appreciate everyone's precious time. Please let us know if you have any problems hearing me or if you have any issues looking at the slides. Just feel free to type in the comments or leave your note and we'll pick it up for you. So again, we're gonna go through some interstitial ads optimization with Firebase. I'm just gonna go ahead and give you a rundown of the agenda, right? So today, really, we have three main components of the solution we wish to share with you. So as you can see, with three different phases. The first one is to visualize your user experience using Firebase and Google Analytics. And once you have that visualization, you have the insights, you might come up with some hypothesis about maybe you should ramp up your interstitial ads frequency and also get more ad revenue. Or if you have a little bit worry about your user retention, user engagement, that's when you go ahead and test it out with Firebase A/B testing. The last part is to literally demystify some of the questions we have about reporting or reporting tools within Firebase and Google Analytics, because we understand there are a lot of building reports, and sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming to find out which one's which and how you can use them together. So that really gives, I hope that gives you an idea of the topics we are going to cover today. The first part, I'll give you a summary of all the three different things we talked about just now. So let's start with the very beginning, right? We want to give you an oversight of the key question or the use case scenario that we've seen a lot of time with our publishers and developers. So just say you probably run into this as well. You're a publisher, you want to increase the frequency of your interstitial ads, but you also worry about user experience and your retention rate. And then you wonder if there's a data-driven way to help you make a better decision before just go ahead with any testing or ramping up interstitial. And actually, what we want to bring you today is with AdMob, you have a few tools already, but when you combine AdMob and Firebase together, it gives you a very powerful set of tools to achieve this goal. And as I mentioned before, we're breaking down your journey, actually your trail, into three parts. So if you have been with us, you have talked to our teams working on AdMob or Firebase, you probably realize a lot of our webinars or our events focus on using Firebase A/B testing for rewarded ads or interstitial ads. So that's going to be our core offering. And what we're doing literally is actually expanding the front and the end with the more information, knowledge about how to use GA4 and Firebase properly. As I mentioned before, when you use Firebase SDK and use GA4 that's connected to your Firebase, you will get all these different reports called Explore that's going to give you visibility of your user journey. So you understand how your users feel at different touch point, different time. And once you have come up with hypothesis, you want to go ahead with A/B testing and to figure out if you can actually ramp up your interstitial ads without hurting user retention experience. And last one is to use reports to look into your results from different angles. You can use just the Firebase A/B testing result reports, but you can also use a few other ones in combination to give higher visibility. And I want to go ahead and give you just sort of like a visualization what we mean by with every single phase of it, right? So the first phase, to map your user journey, to understand, to have visibility of your user engagement. As you can see, our angle is to create this kind of report in Google Analytics, right? So this report is called a funnel exploration. in Google Analytics. So if you go to the left side, there's the explore function, and one of them is called funnel exploration, which we'll talk about later as well. But imagine the thought process behind the scene, right? So you want to understand the user journey of your users, how they end up on each step after seeing an ad or before seeing an ad. How does user interaction look like for you? And one of the things is, in order to get these kind of reports, in order to get this kind of visualization, you need to design the touch points using Firebase. You need to get those data, so that data can be used to create this report. And once you have all those things in place, the end result is similar to what you can see here is a GA4 exploration report. And with that, insights and hypothesis, you can go ahead and design a Firebase A/B testing. So what we are listing here is a very standard way, or at least what we propose, what we recommend our publisher to do is use two different AdMob ad unit, one with the standard ad frequency, the other one with the higher ad frequency, and you do an A/B test comparison to see if more higher ad frequency will actually have any other impact on your user retention or user engagement. And when you're doing this, when you're going through this process, I think an important thing is to understand what exactly is your tolerance. What do you think is going to be significant enough for your app business in terms of ad revenue versus user retention? So for example, if you want to increase 10% of your ad frequency for interstitial ads, and you're expecting, say, the 20% increase in terms of the ad revenue for this format specifically, and you're willing to give away 5% of user retention because of this move. But if it goes beyond this point, maybe this is when you need to reconsider and recalibrate your strategy as well. So Firebase reporting and A/B testing is powerful in this way. And last but not least, again, visualizations of the reports we're going to talk about. As you can see on the left-hand side, this is a Firebase A/B testing default report. So when you run a Firebase A/B test, it'll come with all these kinds of reporting for you to visualize the results. On the right-hand side, it's a set of standard DAU and retention, and also user engagement reports in Firebase as well. And we'll go through the details towards the end of this webinar as well. Okay, so a lot about the summary and highlight. I hope they give you some ideas of what we want to do. We're going back to this again, right? So why do we want to create visualization? I kind of want to go through this with everyone with the beginning with the end in mind, right? So the key goal is to understand your users. Let's just say there's a question you have, right? You are a game publisher. If anybody who's on non-gaming side, apology, we're gonna use gaming for the sake of example today. But you want to understand if users are willing to continue playing the game, stay engaged after watching ads, right? So we're going to give you a hypothetical scenario later, but that's the idea. We want to answer this question by creating visualizations and reports. And then we want to do so in the most scalable way. Right? By scalable, I mean like creating reports without having to do too much queries or too much BI work. You can definitely go ahead and do more complicated analysis if you want to. But here we are putting speed and the insight, surfacing insights in short amount of time instead of focusing a lot on the actual data process to get insights, right? So explore. The reason why we bring it up in this conversation is because it's free and it's very easy to use to create the first set of insights that can be helpful for your business. And how do you do that exactly? We want to talk just enough about the process to create this kind of reports. As you can see, we're not going to go through all of these read it out here, but the idea is to understand your user journey and make sure you get the data you need to visualize that user journey. And you need to prepare it. The process is actually not very difficult, and create a report like what we mentioned before. And the last part is actually surprisingly important, a little bit difficult, is actually to interpretate that results, that dashboard you created. When you create a dashboard, what does it exactly mean for your business? And how does that form a hypothesis for your next step, which is to use Firebase A/B testing? So as promised, I kind of want to give you a scenario, right? I know it's an oversimplified, very ideal situation, but imagine you are a card game developer, right? And then you have a very, again, oversimplified user journey, user trail, which is a user starts using playing your game, playing a card game. The game starts, and it happens, and they finish playing the game, and they get a result of how much time they use to complete a stage, the score, and how many moves. I think those are actually quite standard for card games. And you decided, hey, I want to put in an interstitial ad. And then after watching an ad, the user can go ahead and play, right? So you think that will be a very nice and standard flow for most of your users. So as you can see at the bottom, there are different what we call Firebase events. I know a lot of you could be quite familiar with this already. But imagine Firebase events basically like the touch points, the digital touch points you've created to understand how your user interact with your app. So when they start playing the game, you log an event, you get that timestamp, and it's going to be just give you a name, game start. The results are easy, you can see. I don't have to explain more. The interesting thing is when you put in a Firebase SDK, it automatically collects a set of data, and the ad impression is one of them. But we want to work on this a little bit more. We'll talk about that later, how to get that data properly. And the last one is, again, when a user starts playing a game, you get a game start event as well. So now you have a basic idea of the most fundamental user journey for your game. Then you need to go ahead and log data. So as we talked about before, when the game starts, you want to go ahead and log an event. But the important thing is actually not only logging the event, and also making sure you can leverage. There's another thing called parameter that's attached to an event. So I want to take this chance to really talk about the uniqueness. I know some of the other tools do very similar things as well, but with Firebase, what's cool is that you can not only log an event, but you can associate sub data with every single one of these events. And we'll talk about why it is important, because these parameters will turn into dimensions that can actually enrich and make your analysis a lot more comprehensive compared to the standard ones that if you're only logging like a basic event like this one. So let's just say for game start, you have a game start event and you say, okay, this user starts at level 20, for example, and you get all that information. And similarly for results, for example, you can also log, okay, this is the person who finished and he has a timestamp for the time he finished and getting the result. And underneath it, you can log each of those extra parameters, as we call it. You can log the score, you can log the time, you can log the level, you can log the move, and you can attach them as parameters to this main event. And then how does that actually help you in terms of like building reports or visualization within GA4? And what's going to happen is when you log these events, similar to what we've shown here for Android and iOS, these data just goes into the Firebase, or precisely Google Analytics for Firebase data store, right? But it's kind of sitting there. It's not being utilized. You need to give specific instructions to GA4. So you can either do it through Firebase interface or GA4 interface and say, okay, I understand I have these extra custom events that's being taken from users to my Google Analytics. I want to make sure I can use them for reports. So we end up realizing a lot of our developers and publishers were not made aware of this extra step before, so they weren't able to make the full use of their GA4 and Firebase environment, which is why I want to call it out today. As you can see, now all that data, events data and parameter data is in your Firebase. You want to go ahead inside your console and find a feature called custom definition, and go ahead underneath the custom definition dimension part. You want to create a new dimension, basically. And I mean, we will send this criteria out so everybody can follow the screenshots and step-by-step instructions. We're not going to go into the details, but the idea is you want to give a specific instruction to GA4 and say, make sure you link that data point I have in my storage, link to the report feature, so now I can use it for my reporting. Without doing it, you won't be able to make full use of these data points in your reports. And once you have done literally the prep work to make sure data is available for reporting, we want to proceed with the fourth step, which is to create that report inside GA4. So on the left-hand side, this is actually a very zoomed up shot of the Firebase console. When you're using most of the report function or the events analysis function, you will see one that says view more in Google Analytics. When you click that, or you can just log on to GA4 directly, you will be brought to the GA4 user interface where you see a lot of different features. I think some of you might have used it before, and one of them is called Explore. As you can see here, it's an icon with a little bit arrow mark. When you click on it, you'll be able to access a set of different reports, or as they call exploration. The one we're going to use specifically today is called funnel exploration. But I do want to remind everyone that you can definitely go ahead and play with the rest of the reports in here because they are very, very useful and they're for free. And you don't really break anything, even if you just go ahead and create something. So it's going to be on a personal level, I think it's very fun to do exploration on your app. Might get insights that you never thought about before. But going back to our main topic, we're trying to create a visualization of user journey, right? So I know funnel might not be exactly equal to user journey, but we do want to create because it's in a sequence based on time. So we found it relatively meaningful to use this as a representation of your user journey. So as you can see here, once you start using the funnel reports, there's a whole bunch of different settings you can do. Underneath one called steps, if you click on it, you'll be able to build different touch points or use different touch points in sequence to create that user journey, user funnel that you have previously imagined in your mind. So I know this is kind of small, but as you can see here, we're using game start, results, add impression, and also game start again to create that visualization for the one we mentioned before. One key thing to kind of bring everyone's attention here, there's a little bit of tricky part with add impression. So as I mentioned previously, add impression is automatically collected when you have the Firebase SDK and when you do the linkage with AdMob, for example. But because it does not automatically ingest some of the details such as ad format or the other important parameters, you might need to do some manual work to update that ad impression event with parameters such as ad format to give you a very precise control of which kind of ad impression you're talking about, right? Because imagine the next screen after you finish a game, there's a banner ad and there's an interstitial ad. They both have like ad impression. You want to give very specific instructions and say, okay, I want to talk about the interstitial one specifically to understand the journey. So there might be some manual work. Feel free to reach out to your Google account manager or the local Firebase consultant like myself if you have any questions. Okay, so we're coming down to the last step. When you finish everything, all the steps previously, you should land on report or visualization very similar to this one, which is also the one we shown before. Now, one of the problem we constantly face is all that seems to be pretty cool on the first side, but how to read these signals, how to read these reports, that's a part we find a little bit challenging. And then a lot of our developers don't have that experience because they never used exploration before. So I want to give you an example, right? This is a very oversimplified, a very ideal situation, but I think it's a good representation. So the four stages, the four phases we talked about before, think about a user starting playing a game, 100%. Some people might drop out, maybe due to network issues. So you have like 96 of people who actually completed the game and are seeing the results screen. And what you see here is when it comes to showing an ad, only 60% of people. So what we say here is there's a phrase called abandon rate for this report specifically, but what it means only roughly 60% of people saw an ad after finish a game. And then the next thing that's interesting here is when it comes to the people after they finish watching an ad, do they still want to play a game? Do they does the game start again? You can see it's 99.9%. So most people after finishing seeing an ad, they don't mind and they want to play the game again. So these give you different ideas. So when you compare all these two insights together, what does that mean? Like, first of all, not all your users, right, like we talk about, have watched an interstitial ad after completing a level. So when you finish a game, there's about 40% opportunity that's not being captured there. And the second thing is at least from the point of view of this exploration report, your users actually don't mind watching just one extra ad before they're playing the game, right? So that means there's a part that you haven't utilized. You could fill it up with interstitial ad to make sure you have more ad revenue. And also your users probably wouldn't mind. And now you have a hypothesis that you should be able to ramp up your interstitial ad with confidence, and then actually get more as monetization on your app as well. But again, we understand our app publishers could still have concern, right? Before you just want to full roll out with higher interstitial ad frequency, you want to get more data. You want to make sure this is like a slow, small ramp up instead of like 0 to 100%. This is why we bring you to our core offering, which I think you might have seen multiple versions of this floating around a few times. But these are actually just very, very straightforward. So the key idea is, if you have that hypothesis, you want to ramp up your interstitial ads, the next step is to test it out. And how do you test it out safely? Use Firebase A/B testing. And the way, like I mentioned before, we propose this test to be done is to use different AdMob ad unit IDs. So create different ad units and make sure you're testing two ad units side by side, one as a baseline, the other one as a variant, and see, and also check on the metrics such as ad revenue. I think obviously the one with the higher ad frequency should have higher ad revenue, but the other sub metrics that you want to take into consideration is definitely your user retention. And Firebase A/B testing comes with a set of user retention metrics, which we'll talk about later as well. So this is really just, it looks a little bit complicated, but in a nutshell, it's actually very simplified, right? Run the A/B testing, different ad units, and see what the results look like. Again, we built these instructions for you to follow in case you want to actually execute it. I'm not gonna go through it because we have the details here. So we have 4 steps, right? Prepare your AdMob ad units, as I mentioned previously. Prepare your Firebase A/B testing. And this is the part that actually require a little bit work. But if you have the Firebase Remote Config SDK, chances are there's not that much extra work for you. And then again, once you have all the pieces ready for the A/B testing, all you need to do is run and make sure you monitor results properly. And I'm gonna go ahead and talk about the steps because I think they're, for a lot of our publishers who come in today, you have seen these already. So I think it's not going to be very difficult. But essentially, we're saying like if you already have your AdMob interstitial unit, you want to basically duplicate that one, but just increase the higher frequency, right? So previously, for example, you have 1 interstitial ad per hour. Maybe you can ramp it up to 2 or ramp it up to 3. And then you have 1 ad unit with just 1 ad per hour, the other one with 3 ads per hour. And we'll see how that goes because you can control frequency capping as easy as it is just within AdMob. You don't really have to do code. I think a lot of our developers might prefer using code, which we think it's good as well. But based on experience, when you use AdMob ad unit ID as the parameters that we'll talk about later, things are a little bit easier when it comes to measurement and tracking. But again, if you have other settings in your app, feel free to go ahead and then use different instructions other than the ones we propose. But let's just say you follow our recommendation and you create AdMob ad units for this test. And the next, you want to go into Firebase console. And when you go into Firebase console, when you click on the A/B testing, you will see different options such as creating A/B testing based on remote config or in-app messaging or notification. Today, we're going to focus on remote config. But in the future, if you are interested, I think we'll also talk about how to use notification, which is the Firebase cloud messaging, and also in-app message for A/B testing as well. So when you do that, you chose remote config. You want to go ahead and give your test a name. For example, I call this one the Interstitial Optimization. As you can see here, you can leave a little note and see if you want to just keep a reminder because when you run a lot of A/B tests, you might lose track which one is which. But I say, hey, I want to try the test out the hypothesis that higher interstitial ads frequency is not going to impact my user experience and retention. And you want to go ahead and choose the app that you want to run a test on. Now, we're gonna sidetrack a little bit and talk about this little icon here, this end icon, which is quite often ignored, based on experience. But what it does is actually give you extra options to choose criteria. So like other than the app of your choice, you can actually choose the other thing we call audience, which we'll talk about at the very end. So imagine you create user segments based on user attributes. You want to target users of very specific interest or specific country. You can go ahead and do so. Click on end and select user audience as one of your targeting criteria. Underneath this, like we mentioned before, if you want to run a small test, you don't have to ramp up 100% of your users in the test right away. You can start with as low as just a few percent, 5%, 10%, for example, until you have the peace of mind. When you have enough data, you can ramp it up slowly as well. And so that gives you the targeting criteria. And the next step comes to choosing the goal, right? I think this is actually, as simple as it looks, is actually a very critical step because as we mentioned before, our first revenue metric is usually ad revenue. We want to make sure you can see you have visibility of ad revenue all the time as the top metric. But the other things you want to add is retention. So as I mentioned, Firebase comes with these retention metrics: 1 day, 7 day, 2 weeks, 15 days, and also I think there's one for 30 days. So you basically have visibility of these retentions along with the ad revenue. When you chose those, these will turn into your reporting, part of your reporting for A/B testing, which we'll talk about later. So make sure you choose these carefully because you can view different metrics side by side. And when it comes down to the part we talk about, right? So you want to choose what to flip, right? So the A/B testing with remote config allows you to swap different experiences for different users randomly. So we talked about before, while you can choose various things for your parameter, you can choose to flip on different things. We recommend you to use AdMob ad unit ID here. So fetch from the server side to show this ad unit ID with 1 interstitial ad per hour, or fetch variant A with 3 interstitial ads per hour and use that as your ad unit ID. So this essential is probably the part that's a little bit more complicated. It's not super complicated actually if you think about it, but this is the part that you need a little bit of thinking when you're running your A/B tests. We do strongly recommend you when you scroll down a little bit, you'll be able to change the variance, the weight of the variance, I should say. We strongly recommend a 50 to 50% because that gives you the most unbiased test, or give you the most unbiased insight of the result of your test. Right? And when you change the weight a little bit, it adds extra factors that could affect the results of your test as well. And again, step 3 is to make sure you wire up the Firebase remote config. So you need to do just add a few code lines, mainly the remote config XDK in your code to make sure you can fetch those remote config from the server. But it's not super complicated, and we have a full set of other help center documents or implementation decks for you to go through as well. Thank you. So after you've done all of that, when you finish, OK, when you press OK, Firebase, before you run the experiment, will give you an overview of all the settings you've done before. And when you click Start Experiment, it will start to fetch all these parameters from the backend and send it to your app to display ads properly. And when you do that, it comes down to our last step, which is to use the other reportings in Firebase to check the results. So as I mentioned, when you finish setting up your A/B testing, when you click Start Experiment, it will automatically collect data. Your run test collect data, and in your Firebase console for the A/B test you've done before, you created before, you'll be able to see this dashboard, right? So I want to bring your attention to a few things very quickly. So as you can see here, underneath experiment results, there's estimated ad revenue, retention, 1 day, and retention 4 to 7 days, and also other metrics I've chosen. What this does, if you recall from the previous step, is all the metrics you've chosen before turn into different tabs that you can see here. So the very important thing about, and actually I think this is a really cool feature about Firebase A/B testing, is the results above, like which one actually outperformed, like baseline outperformed or the variant A outperformed. Those will be shown up here based on the main metric you've chosen, for example, ad revenue. However, this result is not based on the combination or aggregation of the other sub-metric. So even though you might actually get, okay, variant A is outperforming based on ad revenue specifically, you do need to manually check the other metrics to make sure you have a fair view, right? So let's just say your variant A is outperforming by 20% in terms of the ad revenue. As we mentioned previously, that meets your goal. But if your user retention on one day or a 47-day drop as much as like 10% or even more, then you need to have another reconsiderations. Like, am I doing this test correctly? Is this really meaningful for my app? Am I doing a little bit too much? You need to reevaluate the process, maybe take a pause of the test and rethink a little bit. So this is one thing that's very we think is very useful with Firebase. It gives you a very holistic view of different metrics you've chosen. And then, like I mentioned before, you don't want to just look at the top one, the primary goal metric, as we talked about it before. This one, and then there's a help center associated with this. It's basically, there's a lot of calculation and machine learning involved in creating this score, right? And there's a thing called p-value, which is, it's basically the confidence score. So the funny thing is, lower the p-value means we have more confidence that this is a very fair, unbiased result that variant A is outperforming the baseline based on the ad revenue metric. It's not because your data is likely not skewed. It's probably very true. You can have higher confidence in this based on this metric. But the other thing I mentioned before is you want to make sure you click into every single one of those tabs to have a holistic view of all the secondary metrics, as we mentioned before. And the other thing is, occasionally when Firebase doesn't get enough data for like a baseline or variant, for example, it will actually use machine learning and try to create model data. And then this is partially associated with that p-score before. So they try to say, okay, well, I think right now we don't have enough data, but based on machine learning models with this level of confidence, we think like the results look like this and that. So as you run your test longer, as you aggregate more data, the p value should, technically speaking, drop a little bit more, so have higher confidence. And all these are indicators of how your specific A/B test is performing. For this interstitial frequency test, for example, that we talk about. But this report specifically is very, very limited from the lens, from the view of the A/B test, right? Because you have a hypothesis, you want to test it out, but sometimes it's important to zoom out from that test a little bit and look at the other aspects of your app as well, which is why we also want to talk about the other reports in Firebase, right? So as I mentioned at the beginning, if you go ahead in your Firebase console, you will have the analytics dashboards, which give you a lot of things. The user activity, so DAU, for example, on the left side, that's one that comes in a lot. And there's a retention one that gives you not the retention of the A/B test, but the retention of your app in general, without thinking about A/B tests. So your A/B test might actually have some level of influence on the overall user retention here. But zooming out a bit, how does your app do? And then is it keeping are users happy? Those are very important metrics as well. And the cool thing is, when you click here, it actually has a view retention button. It's going to give you a set. It's going to drill down basically and then give you a set of other reports with more granularity as well. So basically, it's going to give you the retention versus time, so you have like a more holistic view. And you can also, in the future, we might be able to talk about it. You can add some filtering, for example, based on user geographic or the version of your app, or different attributes of the users to see how they compare to each other. So it's actually a very convenient tool. And we highly recommend everyone to have the exploration process look into these reports as well. And last but not least, actually, last two I will talk about before we dive into some of the questions we've gotten before. So if you recall from phase one, like the very beginning when we talk about it, creating your user touch points and visualizing user touch points using Explore in Google Analytics. So while it doesn't, I think this is some good feature we can recommend to our product team in the future. It doesn't give you like a before after, right? It doesn't do what the A/B test does. So before you run a specific test, or if you do some optimization, how does it look before and how does it look after? Right now, it doesn't do that. But what you can do is you can actually perhaps take a screenshot or a little bit of manual work to recall record how your user engagement looked like before. And after you say run the A/B test or you ramp up your interstitial ads frequency, you revisit the same report and see how it looked like, right? So it's a manual taking a snapshot of before and after, and figured out if it's improved or if it's got worse, and what kind of actions you should take as a next step. So this in combination of the A/B test report that we mentioned previously, we think these give you tools to look at the same thing from different perspective and make that very strict. Last but not least, right? So this is actually one thing that's I kind of want to use to reinforce the reason why we recommend using AMAP at unit ID or at unit specifically as the parameter of your A/B test. Because when you do so, you can recreate the performance results inside AMAP as well. So you can still use Firebase reports, to monitor the results of these tests. But if you want to, you can also recreate very similar thing inside AMAP as well. And all you need to do is go into the mediation report, and you chose the two ad units you have used previously for your A/B test. You run a side-by-side comparison, and you have a very holistic view of the performance, right? So again, obviously, we expect the one with higher ad frequency to have more ad requests, and therefore, assuming the same match rate, the same show rate, performance should be a couple times higher. But then you want to verify, you want to testify all these data points inside AdMob and also in Firebase, and make sure that you have the most accurate results of your tests, and before you go ahead and just increase interstitial ads for all of your users. So yeah, I think this is really, I know there's a lot of me talking for the past 35 minutes. Really appreciate listening. But I think to wrap things up, there are two more things I want to share with you. So that was interstitial ads optimization based on using a Firebase recipe, Firebase solution. But as I mentioned before, if you recall, in the Firebase A/B testing part, you can also use the end icon and add different filtering options. And this is where we think, at least from our lens, this is a good case for to use your first-party data. I think this is a thing that people talk a lot about before, right? What does that mean exactly? So inside Firebase and Google Analytics, there's a feature I think we touched on a little bit more just now called audiences. Audience is actually a very simple concept. It's basically building user segments, but specifically with the data you have obtained or you have gathered using the Firebase SDK previously. So while you can create audiences, you can create segments based on geographic data like users' location, users' language settings, or like I mentioned previously, the versions of your app. You can also use your custom events and custom parameters, and that brings us all the way back to the beginning when we talk about logging your user touch points, because those turn into powerful tools. Not only on reporting, you can use it for reporting to generate more granular reports for insights, but you can actually act on it, right? You can build a user segment. For example, if you finish playing finish playing card games, and their results and the score is higher than 5,000, which should be a high score, then these users are really good. And then one of the hypotheses might be like the users who are really good at a game practice a lot and therefore could be very engaged. And then you might be thinking, do these kind of users, can they, because they know how to play the game, they're engaged, can they see a little bit more ads and still be be as engaged? Or is this opportunity for me to go for IAP, diversify my revenue stream? These signals, like the ones you created previously, can be powerful tools. Or on the other hand, very similar concept. If you have an event called level up, every single time you use the level up with a different game, could be an RPG game, you're like, okay, that's a good indicator how engaged my users are. If level up to level 200, that this user is played 200 different stages of level, that's a very engaged user. Same idea. Can this kind of users see a little bit more ads, or are they good candidates for IAP? And that's kind of thing data, that's kind of power data gives you. And then, like I say, this is a very iterative, this is a repeating process. in order to have a good visualization of your user journey, you need to first start creating user touch points. You need to gather these. And once you feel, okay, maybe that user touch point is not enough for me to achieve the purpose or to get the insights I actually crave for, you need to go back and revisit how you create a new user touch point to achieve your goal. So I think this is not like a one stop and then you do everything all together, finish. It's going to be a very PDCA kind of a process. And I think that's a very powerful tool for our developers and publishers, because your users are changing all the time, your business are changing all the time. Data gives you insight. Data is oil, and then gives you the best option. Give you all the information you need to make the next best option as well. So last one to wrap it up before QA. Once you have those user audiences, this is the one to create the segments. And then, as we mentioned previously, bringing you back to the good old A/B testing, and then actually remote config can use the same feature too. Once you finish choosing your app, if you click End, and then as I mentioned before, there's user audience, and you can go ahead and choose whichever one you have created previously. So if you create advanced player based on, for example, a score, you'll be able to use it, and you'll be able to run A/B tests or do optimization very specifically on these kind of users as well. Okay, so this is the real end of this webinar. I hope there's a lot of information to share with everyone. I hope if you have any questions, feel free. I know we have some pre-submitted questions. I'm gonna be able to go through some of them. But if you have more thoughts about how to implement, or you have more like real-time, real-life questions, feel free to reach out to your Google account managers, Firebase consultants. We'll be able to help you. I'm going to stop sharing the screen, but we are going to go through some of the questions, if you don't mind. And I think I chose about like 4 or 5, right? And I think some of them are more related to the webinars today, and so we're gonna be able to and go through it with you. So I'm gonna go with the first question, right? So we have a question says, how to organically reach more users for an early stage app and optimize ad costs, for example. So again, thank you for this question. So this is a very interesting one. So this is the one we, as a Firebase consultant, we've tried to explore a little bit, right? So imagine you're a developer, publisher, chances are you have multiple apps, right? Every single time you launch a new app, launch a new title, you're wondering if you can bring the same pool of user and make sure you have some insights of what kind of users you want to acquire. So while this is, obviously user acquisition itself, or reaching user itself organically, it depends on your reputation as an app. If you do it organically, then your game or your app is really good, that people just share it around and then naturally gets traction. But chances are you want to mix that with your user acquisition strategy as well. So on the monetization side, we don't really work on acquisition kind of topics. But one thing I think that can be helpful, at least on some level, is as we mentioned before. So make sure you get the custom data points, get more insights about your users. For example, if you recall the card game we talked about just now, the level of users, the scores, maybe those are indicators of users who are likely going to be very engaged with your game or with your app. Once you identify this kind of users, you have insights. It could be contextual too. So like users in the United States, age 20 to 30, and also people who tend to play a little bit more, you get the attributes. Use those signals on your user acquisition campaign, right? So while in the future we're hoping to be able to bridge just data from the monetization side or from Firebase to user acquisition. To some level you already can, but you can also do it verbally. So once you identify the users who you think are going to be more engaged with your app, through data, go ahead and acquire more of those users. It might be helpful for your business as well. Okay, and then I want to take this chance to also remind everyone that there should be a feedback form for you to fill in. So I really appreciate your time. Definitely feel free to fill it in. It should be right next to the video player on the event page. Feel free to leverage that. to give us feedback and also share your thoughts with us. Okay, next question. How to calculate ad density for my apps, and what are the benchmark for ad density? So again, thank you for that question. Ad density is a little bit tricky because I think there's another question behind this question. If, bear with me and let me know if it's wrong in any other kind of form. But I think most of our developers want to understand what is the good ad density, right? What is the good ad density for my app or for the category? And I think one thing is it's hard to have a universal ad density thing or like a standard for everyone because every app is a little bit different, right? But one thing you can do is on AppMap front end on AppMap reports, when you have AppMap and you have Firebase, when you establish linkage, the integration between these two systems, data will start to flow from Firebase back into AppMap, and then you can use a feature called user activity report. I think some of you might have used it already. And then the really cool thing about that report is it gives you a visualization of DAU. That's the same data as you can see in Firebase, and also DAV, so daily active viewers, ad viewers, to be precise. So that will give you some ideas, right? So at least if DAU and DAV on the same bar, then you probably realize every single DAU is at least watching one ad every day. But if it's below that percentage, maybe there's a chance for you to optimize. And also what we talked about before, if you create that visualization using Explore, you probably have you'll be able to identify places to increase your ad frequency altogether, right? And then the other thing is inside Firebase, when you put in the SDK and when you set up the linkage with AppMap, ad impression data will also flow from AppMap to Firebase. So previously we talked about the Firebase user data flowing into AppMap, but this is the other way around. AppMap data, impression data flowing into Firebase. In Firebase, you'll be able to see the ad impression per user count, right? So that's gonna give you a very high level understanding, like for all the global users you have on your app, iOS, Android alike, how many people seeing how many ads, how many impressions happen per user, right? So you will have at least a bar. So like maybe it's 3 per person per day. Then you'll be like, okay, so anybody who's below that line, anybody who's only seeing like 1 ad per day, is probably not seeing enough ads. You have a chance to optimize that kind of user. So the AppMap reports will give you some level of understanding where the bar is for your app specifically, and that's from your first party point of view. And the last one I want to bring on the table is you can reach out to your Google account managers because we do offer some of the consultation services from user experience point of view or benchmark point of view. We do have a set of tools when we aggregate third-party data and also our data and give you, and then say, okay, this is how your ad perform against a set, what we call a peer set, or a set of different apps of your choice. And then you can say, okay, am I displaying enough ad in comparison to the other apps before? For example, do I have enough interstitial compared to the other apps in the same category? If not, then combined with our Firebase recipe, then you should be fairly confident that the market should be able to accept more interstitial ads, and you have more chance to grow as well. So I hope that's a very long answer. I hope that gives you some ideas of how to assess ad density and how to act on it. And I think we're going to take 2 more questions from the pre-submitted one before we give everyone's time back today. So next question. AppMap interstitial ads show rate is low in some apps. Please specify the reasons for that. Okay, so thank you for that question as well. So I think if you go through the thought process with me a little bit, when until the impression happen, until the click happen, there's the ad request coming in, there's the the match response have to come back, and then the ad has to be shown, right? So most of the time when we see show rate being an issue, it's usually because there's something wrong with the way the ad is loaded or the ad is cached. So that's usually associated with implementation. And this is when you have to review and figure it out. Okay, did I load the ad properly? Is it showing? But how does Firebase, and I want to give you an idea, how does Firebase help you in this? If you recall that process of logging custom events, you can create the same funnel, but specifically for the ad experience. So this is a bit manual work. So it's entirely up to your discretion how far you want to go with this. You can, when the ad request is sent, you can lock an event data. When the response come back, you can lock another data. When the ad is loaded, you can lock another data. When an impression happen, an impression we talked about before, you can lock another data. Now you can enhance that data. Click happens and you lock that data. So what it does, and with the parameters based on which ad network and all the other information, it gives you a very comprehensive, or basically you feel all the data you need to create that visualization, very similar to the one we mentioned previously for the user experience one, except this one is going to be the ad experience one. So what it does is like you'll probably be able to see like the ad placement or the ad source of the places where you have like a drop of the show rate. Like why is that not being loaded? Is it because the response is not coming back? Probably not true. And then if it's like not loaded, then you need to go look at the place specifically in your code and maybe reinvestigate and see if you can tweak it so your ad loads properly and it's being displayed. Even though if it's not displayed, if it has a response and not displayed, then yeah, you are missing out opportunity on the show rate side. Okay. One last question. I think this is a really interesting one and really appreciate it. The question is, should we use of Gemini AI in interstitial A/B testing in Firebase? So again, thank you for this is a very unique question. So I don't want to be a bummer, but I want to give you a realistic image. Right now, we haven't seen Gemini being integrated or like Gen AI being integrated specifically on features like Firebase A/B testing or remote config, right? But it does, if you recall that A/B testing result with the p-value, there is AI machine learning being involved in that kind of process. It is just not the Gen AI that we've talked a lot more extensively these days, right? But one thing is we are constantly exploring the possibility, right? So if you have a very specific scenario or use case where you think, okay, this is where, or like this is how I think Gemini can help Firebase A/B testing, in such a way, like maybe to make the metrics more available, to make the reports look better, or maybe to generate very descriptive recommendation for your next step, next step recommendation. Those are the ideas we create from our developers. We really need to learn. We need to know. So if you have those scenarios, feel free to send it to us because we want to aggregate it and send it to our product team. But to wrap this one up, to give you an idea of the machine learning capabilities, at least on a very high level, what you can use in Firebase, Google Analytics, mostly three things I can think of. First one, unfortunately, we weren't able to talk about it today, is a thing called predictive matrix, predictive audience. By the name, you can probably already figure it out. If you have enough data aggregated in Firebase and Google Analytics, it will be able to predict the users who are likely going to churn or the users who are likely going to make an in-app purchase. So right now, it's very specifically, very limited to these two use cases only. And then you need to have enough data in the first place too. But once you have them, and I think it's a very easy because there's no coding involved to turn this feature on. So you can just go ahead and leverage it and create a new audience user segment to see who is going to churn. You can engage that user a little bit to bring them back. That's one use case. Another thing is, I think you might have seen some versions of our criteria already. It's called the remote config personalization, right? So it's going to use machine learning to give different user experience based on users' behavior. And say, for example, game difficulty being one example. It's like trying to use users' data and say, okay, this user is more engaged with a lower level, easier level of a game. This user is standard level is fine. These users are power users, and I want to give them the hardest level possible so they can stay engaged because they don't feel bored. So that's personalization in a nutshell. And the last but not least is going beyond AdMob and Google Analytics a little bit, is to send your aggregate data from Firebase into BigQuery, and I think some of you might have used it already. And when you have that data in BigQuery in Google Cloud Platform, obviously there's a lot of like plugins, all these other models that is very, very readily available inside the GCP environment already. So you have the raw data, you have the ingredients. Next is how you massage them, how you analyze on them, and then with that, I think the three things I think about AI with Firebase all the time: predictive metrics, personalization, and GCP. If you go with that, I think that's a lot of stuff to play with already. But again, if you have ideas of how you think Gemini can help our business better, or if you have specific use cases, we're absolutely open to all these suggestions as well. So with that, I'd like to really, again, appreciate everybody's time. It's been me talking for a long time. Please send in your feedback. And because with the feedback, you can download the deck, the slides we're using today. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to leverage any kind of form to reach out to us. And we're always open to suggestion as well. And I really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.